An election is coming, universal peace is declared, and the Foxers have a sincere interest in prolonging the lives of the poultry. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is Election 2024, the real issues. Joining us this evening on the show are Dr. Vinya Ariyaratne, President of the Sarvodaya Movement, Attorney at Law Dilrukh Chandunetti, Co-founder, Director, Center for Investigative Reporting, Dr. Rohan Tatukorala, former Chairman, EDB and Sri Lanka Tourism, as well as Danusha Gihan Patirana, Economist. To pose questions from our panelists this evening, on to my immediate right is Niresh Eliathamni, on to my immediate left is Nadeem Majid. You too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. WhatsApp your messages to the number 076 656 5353. The number once again 076 656 5353. Let's get the ball rolling today with Dr. Vinya Ariyaratne, President of the Sarvodaya Movement. Dr. Vinya, many things are happening around us right now as we speak. We saw two very formidable court decisions being made today, and everyone is getting prepared for elections 2024. What are the real issues faced by the people of the country? Your time starts now.
Yeah, Shamir, I think firstly I'm not very familiar with the details of the court decision, but real issues. Now, whose real issues? Is it we as professionals or as citizens or as a senior citizen, or is it what we read in the news and how we interpret? So let me answer the question with from a professional point of view. I work with communities and also in the medical profession as a public health specialist. So here I think we haven't still got out of the crisis. Last year we had a major crisis in the health sector as a result of COVID-19 and then followed by the economic crisis. We still haven't come out of the crisis in terms of really having the health sector functioning to the optimum level that it used to function. The shortages of medicines to staff issues to out migration of doctors and other health personnel. So those issues are still there. The real issues in the health sector, those are issues which are, when you say real issues, I interpret them as issues that directly affect the citizens in their daily lives. It's not something that will happen later or in their in terms of their secondary needs, but it's about primary needs. And also when you look at the communities that we work with, the food security is a major issue. The cost of food and the levels of nutrition. Now we have seen a huge negative impact on the children, particularly children under 5 and also lactating mothers, pregnant mothers. Now those issues are still not being addressed. Now there were measures by the government as well as the non-governmental sector to address the immediate impact of say even severe malnutrition and all that, but you need to address the root causes of these issues. So we don't see sustainable solutions being worked out, and also the what's happening now, there are many decisions that are pending to be addressed in really looking at equitable distribution of resources to budgeting and allocation of financial resources to various sectors, not just in the health sector but in other sectors as well. So I think there are issues in the social sector, mainly health and education. We have seen trade union action, how it has been impacting the population directly. So that has secondary impact, because if people are unable to get to school or to work and all that, then you have an impact on the productivity also. Then also I think what's important is that we have seen a lot of violence in our society. When you have instability and when you don't feel that there is rule of law in the country, then all these the poverty and the frustration of the youth and attraction of certain segments of the population to gang violence and things like that, we have seen a significant rise. and also when it comes to mental health issues and suicides, we have seen an upward trend. So basically there is no stability, no social stability, and because of the certain measures that have been taken by the government to recover the economy has had a disproportionate negative impact on the most vulnerable sections of the population, which are manifested in, as I said, the nutritional levels of children, and also domestic violence to other forms of violence in the society. That's how I read the situation now, and those are the real issues.
Dr. Ariratna, what are the expectations of the people when it comes to an election? Because we all know that the Elections Commission has already announced that by Friday, that is 2 days from now, the date for a presidential election would be announced. What are the expectations of the general public in the country?
So there is uncertainty about the election itself now. So I think people are expecting a definitive answer that the election will be held. We know that it cannot be postponed. It just is not a possibility, but then there is this confusion created. So that has to go away. So the first thing is, even before what people decide in terms of what they want in the elections, I think they should have confidence that the electoral process is intact. But if they have the, if they of course announce the dates and proceed with the elections as per the electoral process, then I think people need to really, they are expecting mainly some form of relief for the economic conditions that they are facing, because majority of the population, they are struggling, and their household income has gone down, even though the certain say food items, those are available now, and also the fuel prices have also gone down, and also people don't know whether these are related to the elections, even the electricity tariff and all those things. So there has to be certainty. I think the people deserve that from the rulers, from the governing parties, because without that confidence in people, I think that uncertainty is leading to a lot of damage in their own normal social lives as well as productivity in the country.
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Vidya Ariratna, President of the Sarvodaya Movement. Just to give some context with regard to the two court decisions that was issued today by the Supreme Court. One was that an interim order preventing Deshabandhu Tennakoon from performing duties in the post of Inspector General of Police, and the other was the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka announcing an interim injunction preventing the implementation of community advisory committees which were appointed to conduct government development projects targeting rural areas amounting to 10 million each for certain areas in question. So those are the two court orders that were delivered today by the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Attorney at Law Dilruksh Chandunetti, co-founder director for Center for Investigative Reporting. Dilruksh, interestingly, there is a very famous quote which says, birds of the same feather flock together. Now, if you look at politicians today, they're crossing over. You see politicians from one side, from the SLPP, supporting the candidature of Ranil Wickremesinghe as the president. You see members, former members of the SLPP supporting the candidature of Sajith Premadasa. You see members of the SJB supporting the candidature of Ranil Wickremesinghe. So it's absolutely a soup. We're talking about petty agendas. Here we have petty agendas taking center stage ahead of a presidential election in the country. How do you view corruption in the country as we speak at this very moment of time?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. I think if you look at the context, if you also remember what 2022 was all about, 2022 was also about corruption. And there were a lot of public demands that are not being actually being discussed or being addressed by the politicians. So one of the things that people did see was the fact that we have seen culturally horse trading a lot. There has been a lot of horse trading in this country, and it seems that this is one of our political priorities. Our politicians don't necessarily relate to the public aspirations, and there is a huge gulf between what politicians want and how they want to perpetuate systems, and what people want and people's aspirations. Shamir, I want to actually talk about a couple of examples from from some of our recent work, talking to communities. Strangely enough, when we spoke to people from 4 different areas in Sri Lanka in recent months, this is for an investigative reporting initiative, people said that they have not seen their people's representative for the longest possible time. They said that they only come during election time. They expect them to visit right now. Because they do believe that there will be an expectation, that there would be an election and it would be the right time to come. But what people wanted was a reference, they were referring to what people wanted in 2022. We asked for a change in the system and dealing with corruption, assets recovery, law and order to be restored, and young people, to listen to young people. So when you talk to regular people, what I hear is that corruption is still, it's such a core issue, and not just for people like us who are, professionals and probably have a different way of understanding and unpacking it, but people finally, when you speak to regular people, they actually understand what it really means at the village level, at the community level. Why certain things are so expensive? Why people think that everything is going up in prices? Also because there is corruption around that. And they think that there are certain projects taking place in Sri Lanka because there is corruption linked to those projects. So to give you a quick answer, I think it should be on the agenda, but I don't see it on the political level.
So Dinushri, the word corruption itself is a very buzzword in Sri Lanka, especially after the Aragalaya which took place in the country a couple of years ago. Do you think the word corruption has really boiled down to the grassroots of the country? Because at the end of the day, it's not just the urban areas which is going to decide as to who the country's president is going to be. It's the entire country as a whole. And majority of them are coming from the grassroots villagers of this country. So do you think corruption has been boiled down to the grassroots of this country? And do you think they believe that there needs to be a change in the way in which we govern the country?
If we actually approach this question before 2022, I think the answer would have been different, and people probably did not understand corruption or link it to the political culture in our country. But after 2022, people do have a better sense of the word corruption and how it actually impacts your life on a daily basis. But I haven't done a survey, so I'm not going to give you very definitive answers, but I'm going to stick to some of the things that people told me. So in terms of prioritizing issues in a forthcoming election, people think that there should be systemic change, a change in the government. And their answers are very different, but in terms of addressing corruption, they think just bringing laws are not enough. They need to see heads rolling. They need to see some action being taken. They need to see something being done by the government. Because there were promises, there were young people demanding change and dealing with corruption in this country. So this is like, we really don't care for the real issues. We really don't care as to why people actually got on the streets and said go home. There were a million reasons possibly, but one was definitely corruption, nepotism and cronyism, all of that.
Right. Very quickly, Dinushri, before I move to Rohantha, we saw the manner in which how a cabinet paper was moved recently with regard to the burials that took place during COVID-19 and the government apologizing. Do you see this as a act of play prior to an election just to win the hearts and minds of the minority communities in the country?
If you're really genuine, I think at that time we would not have done it. We should not have done it. But right now, I think the politicians, whether they're in government or in opposition, would feel the need to actually seek favor with the minorities, because it's going to be very decisive. And how the minorities, if you look at India, how minorities have chosen their leaders or voted, the patterns are very different. So
but do you think Diluksha, just an apology is good enough?
No, it's not good enough. It's really not good enough. It's just a word. To say sorry is easy, but when you have taken away people's cultural, religious rights, and when there is no scientific foundation, I think that's the core issue, that you have to go with the science, and here is the doctor, so we can ask him for expert guidance.
All right, thank you very much, Attorney at Law Diluksha Chandraneti, a co-founder of the director Center for Investigative Reporting. I now move my attention to Rohan Tatukorala, former chairman of the Export Development Board, as well as Sri Lanka Tourism. Rohanta, I happen to have visited your Facebook account and I swept through the posts that you put in, and 5 years ago you say something very interesting on your Facebook account. You say 2.3 million new voters, who are essentially the youth of Sri Lanka, will determine the new leadership of the country. That's the reality. We have to understand how this Generation Z thinks and react. Now tell me, you're definitely not from the Gen Z, are you? But I want to ask you, what prompted you to put that post on Facebook, and what is the expectation of the Gen Z, in your opinion?
See, Shamir, thank you very much for the invite, and very interesting topic. See, overall, I think it's the most beautiful time in one's life is election time, and the only reason is because it's where you have to understand what people want, and then you suddenly have a group of people investing on time trying to understand what are these requirements and how they fashion themselves to meet the requirements of these target groups. So, very creative communication methods come, there are beautiful promises which are made. So, election time is something that I really focus on. Now, Gen Z, it's very interesting. 92, the research that has been done by Kanta shows that 91% of the people are interested, and they are not aligned to any political party. That's what Gen Z research says from Kanta, and of which 76% say, Shamir, that they want to vote.
They want to vote.
They want to vote. So that's insight that is coming. Now, what do they want? Well, let me just give you a quick view of who these people are. These people are people who are very strongly linked to common decision making, and you wouldn't believe this, but almost 46% of them are earning money. They earn almost 46,000 rupees per year because the guys are doing their own jobs, so they're very real. So another key insight coming out of this Gen Z group is that almost 73% of them are totally into internet. So newspapers, we highlight things and we give focus to certain topics. In their eyes, they don't see those. They see all data coming and they will pick what they want. So environment is crucial for them. They are very interested about diversity. They are very conscious of humanity, looking after the dogs and down the road, and so the way they think is different. So 2.3 million people of them, as you said, is going to vote for the first time. So how they are going to select a leader is going to be very, very interesting. I don't know what their logic of selection is, but all I know is that the way they think and the way they get exposed to media is very different to you and I.
So, Rohan, if you look at the three main candidates, at least two have already announced their candidature at the next presidential election, that is Anukumara Dissanayake and Sajid Premadas, we still don't know whether President Ranil Wickremesinghe would contest the upcoming elections or not. I again go back to one of your Facebook posts that you put. You say, very interestingly, quoting Steve Jobs, that the risk you are afraid to take could change your life. If someone asks you, keeping experience aside, and look at a new front runner at the next presidential election, who would be that front runner?
Tough to say, Shamir, to be honest, because if you look at, I mean, personally for me, I've not yet made up my mind, because I'm not sure of the exact promises of each of the candidates that are coming out, which we will see in the next 3 months. All I know is that almost 90% of the people are struggling to cover their cost. Latest research from Papercube Research says 91% of the people, the expenditure is more than their income, and of which almost 2/3, which is 73% of them, have 2 meals a day. So this is very, very serious, and I suppose I'm trying to get a hold of as to how, you know,
right.
You have CPC that makes 120 billion profit in last year, 2023, and CEB makes 76 billion profit, and Water Board makes 5.2 billion profit last year. Now these are non-profit making entities. If that money was transferred to the consumer, their overall disposable income will increase, and that can turn to them having to live with the money that they earned. And this quarter, first 4 months, Shamir, once again you have 14 billion profit by CPC. CEB has made 90 billion profit in the last 4 months. These are all published data, it's on the media. And Water Board has made 11 billion. Now, if there was some degree of decision making, those policy decisions should have been made to turn it into a consumer benefit. Because if you are 91% of the population saying, you know, I'm finding it difficult to live, then the question is that, you know, this is the first thing that you will look for.
And let's not forget the fact that over 500,000 electricity connections have been disconnected in the country owing to the increase of tariffs in electricity. Rohan, very quickly, Rohan, before I move to Dhanusha. Now, you may have decided, Rohan, the last time when you went to the election booth, who you are going to vote. This time around, have you made a decision yet? Or
I have no.
You don't have to mention who you are voting, but I'm just asking you.
I mean,
have you made that decision? Because when you put that post on Facebook about Gen Z, I want to ask about your generation. Have your generation made that pick yet?
see, as at now, no. And the logic is because yet only 2 brands are on the fray. The 3rd brand has not yet said they are coming in. We don't know what the 4th and the 5th brand is coming out. Number 2 is that we also have to understand that we are in a very critical juncture, Shamir, because you have made critical policy decisions at a macro level, which we see, you know, all the macroeconomic factors which are positive, but it has not flown down to the consumer.
Right.
We are in brand marketing. End of the day, our brands survive if a consumer can buy, and that has not trickled down. So I'm trying to understand how that is going to be addressed. And number 2, Shamir, before I share my last thought, is that there was a diagnostic study done by IMF, and it was done the first time in the last 40 years in Asia, which said 16 key points on governance that had to be dealt. Now, if 73% of the IMF stipulations have been met, how come these 16 items have not been met, which was the key issues that IMF said? Now, I want to see who is the candidate who is going to come out to address these 16 key issues, and we know that corruption was the cause of this debacle.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rohan Nathukorala, former chairman ADB as well as Sri Lanka Tourism. I now move my attention towards Dhanusha Gihan Patrana, economist. Dhanusha, we've had individuals coming on the show during the last few months, and one of the key issues we raised to them was that what are the expectations of the public with regard to an election? Now we are just 2 days away, technically, based on what the Elections Commissioner had said with regard to a date in which elections would be announced. Dhanusha, manifestos, how important are manifestos for the public, or is it just piece of paper which should be thrown right to the bin?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. So now, I think, about manifestos, now I think mostly the general public learns about the policies of particular, these, especially the mainstream political parties, through the rhetoric that comes out through media. So I don't know how much a percentage of the population or our constituency actually go through into these manifestos, whether the facts and promises mentioned in the manifestos are actually met. But of course, what we need to see is that I think, like what Dr. Rohan here mentioned about certain facts, some grave facts about the actual conditions, if actually those facts are, I hope so that they are more realistic. And one was that right now we have already met about 75% of IMF conditions, right? So this is very interesting. And now, while 75% of the IMF conditions are met, we have, according to these facts, 73% of the population find it very difficult to get 2 meals a day. So, and we have to see what these policies are actually, to whose benefit these IMF policies are actually designed, and whether it is designed for a greater good of a majority of the population and stability, or so-called stability of the economy, or while that has been the more popular rhetoric, whether the policies latently supporting any particular interests, whether it could be whether the creditors, international creditors, or the domestic elite that has been ruling the country since the independence, and whether also just to highlight, I think now there's a change in perception of the public with regard to the ruling elite. There was, let's say, a complacency among the public that despite the fact of all this corruption and so on, they are still continued to attach to itself and allow them to hang on to the political power. But right now we see, at least in the popular discourse, that attachment to the existing or traditional ruling elite is changing, and the ties are loosening up. So we exactly don't know where the ship is moving in terms of political power at this point in time.
You say
it's a very positive change, I should say.
So Dhanush, you say that we don't know where the ship is heading
in terms of power.
In terms of power.
Yeah.
So let me put this question to you again. Now we saw the manifesto of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, which came in 2019,
right,
which very clearly says in one of the preambles that those who were involved in corruption, especially the central bank bond controversy and other corruption acts, will be dealt with and will be brought before the law.
Yeah.
So if you look at who the person who was involved in the central bank bond controversy and who the minister in charge at that time was, it was Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Right.
And then the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration, keeping the manifesto aside, goes on to appoint and select Ranil Wickremesinghe as their presidential candidate after the Aragalaya. And then we saw the manner in which right now several members of the SLPP have broken ranks within the party and are supporting the candidature of Ranil Wickremesinghe at a future election as well.
Yeah.
So all these manifestos are just utter rubbish, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a general strategy implemented everywhere in the world. I think within this framework of governance, that the ruling elite divides itself into two fractions, at least politically, so that you give this fake sort of choice to the public, look, the two fractions are not the same. Look, we will take action against the other fraction when we come to power. But obviously, the center of gravity of the establishment remains particularly attached to.
Let me put these words that you just mentioned now in two terms.
Yeah.
Petty agendas.
So you could obviously say that, so that ultimately, end of the day, the power and especially the access to resources through power, which is one of the central concerns, especially government revenue, and more than revenue, the expenditure, where the expenditure is headed.
Right.
So all those access to resources are safely intact within their grasp. So that of course has been the norm, but I think right now people do understand to a great extent where this was headed, and I don't think they have easily forgotten where we were like a couple of years ago, or at least 1.5 years ago, and that those lessons have been still quite strongly registered in their mind.
Right.
And I feel that they will take some action against the status quo.
Thank you very much, Dhanush Gihan Patirina, economist. I now move my attention to the two gentlemen onto my immediate right and immediate left. Right is Niresh Eliathambi, consultant and director at Newsfirst, and onto my immediate left is Nadeem Majid. So let's get the ball rolling with Niresh, but just a quick reminder, you too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. WhatsApp your messages to the number 076 656 5353, the number once again 076 656 5353, and we would be delighted to take those questions to our panelists. I'm already getting a lot of messages, and I would be taking them momentarily as the show goes along. So Niresh, the ball is literally in your court. You can pose your questions to the panelists.
Well, thank you, Shamir. But earlier you were talking about ships and icebergs and things like that. So what's the point of the ball being in anyone's court if we've already hit the iceberg? Right. My first question is to Dilrukshi. Let's talk about manifestos. So over the next few weeks, we will be given these volumes of paper, and this time, will people actually read those? Because normally we don't. We as journalists do, but most people simply don't bother to read it. Will people read it this time?
Well, that's a very hypothetical question, but I think manifestos are really important. It is your first policy statement, right, as a party. And if you recall, Niresh, in the past several months, the election observer groups have been saying that manifestos have to be, presented to the public well in advance. That's like 6 months ahead. But then we go back to the question that Rohanta was speaking about. We don't even know who the players are. The brands are not known. So when brands are not known, we don't really know what they represent or what they stand for. So there is a problem. But if you really want to look at the governance aspect of running an election, it's critically important that you actually present your manifestos. And whether people actually connect to the manifestos or not, we have never made it a public document. Have we ever asked them what it needs to be like? I just want to give you 2 examples from some of the work that we have been doing. Political parties take the Tamil political parties in the north, right? So you have a set of questions, set of issues that are geographically, even according to ethnicity, that are really very important to you. But in that, except for resettlement, livelihood support kind of things, we actually studied some of the manifestos to find that people's real issues are not there. None of the issues that women were talking about were really included in the manifestos. So women are really impacted by the war, and we are talking about conflict-affected communities for 20 plus years. So manifestos are never really a reflection of people's aspirations in this country, and that's really sad. And whether people feel connected to that, I'd really worry about it, because I don't think they are actually drafted with the understanding as to what people want. There's a huge disconnect.
But how do you make the manifesto stick once they become presidents, prime ministers, whatever? That's it. I mean,
I think we should ask for, legal recognition as the first document, and I think it should be in some other countries. There are many countries where manifestos are having that kind of recognition. So your policy planning, if you come into office, should be linked to what you promised, and this is one way of demanding accountability. Demand, because if you wait for it, it doesn't happen. So in order to ensure that manifestos are a reflection of real issues and real answers that a political party wants to actually look after if they come into office, and we should campaign for that level of change where you treat it as a proper legal document, and which means your policy planning has to be linked to that, and anything that doesn't get married into that
Dinushi,
document.
we've heard these buzzwords about key performance indicators, that ministers have to be subjected to KPIs, and if they are not performing, they have to be removed, and new individuals have to be brought. And we've seen the manner in which in 2015, the Maithripala Sirisena administration said that they want to create a scientific cabinet. I don't know where there was science with regard to the Ministry of Highways and Ministry of Higher Education. I really don't know. But we've heard all this. These have just become rhetoric that we speak just before an election. Don't you think so?
Shamir, we also have laid-back people largely. We don't actually demand the kind of governments we want to have. We've been quiet for so long, 75 years plus, right? And we have never really said this is what we are looking for. And that is why I think 2022 was a watershed moment in our political history, because people actually said these are the things that we want to look for. And that's really important. As he said, these are the Gen Z people, young people. We don't probably even relate to some of the issues. Maybe we don't. But these are the people who will actually be running this country in the next 20 years' time, hopefully, and their aspirations are not getting connected to. Yes, the buzzword issue is always there, but if the citizens don't actually demand a few things, and we are silent, we have been so silent for the longest possible time, we get the politicians we deserve. We have been getting the politicians we deserve because we have also been largely a very quiet.
No, but if you look at it, if you look at it, Dinushi, we've heard ministers saying in Parliament that until Ranil Wickremesinghe is behind bars, that they won't stop their fight or they won't go to sleep. But those very ministers are now supporting his candidature to become president. I honestly don't understand what these ministers say in Parliament and what are their promises to the public.
You're technically saying that Sri Lankan politics is really a cesspit, and we all know that it is. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to give up on our citizenship. We have given up on our citizenship to a large extent. And this is also why it's not just the young people's movement, but also the fact that civil society, look at people like Dr. Aryaratna and the kind of movements that they have been building, communities that have been demanding, and the two decisions you were referring to just a few minutes ago, they also come. I know it's very difficult and it takes a long time and we don't have the patience. We also need to see some results in the coming years, and the changes to be visible. It is not going to be so fast, but I think we really have to push. And right now we actually have to ask those very difficult questions. Do we ask those very difficult questions from the politicians?
So Dr. Vinya, if you look at the recent statement, I referred to the one with regard to the cabinet paper that was issued to apologize to the victims who were affected by the cremation that took place during COVID. What are your thoughts on this? Because you come also from a medical background. You mentioned that before. You come on the show a couple of times highlighting the issues in relation to the health crisis in the country. How do you view this? Is it just another gimmick to deceive the people?
Yes, Shami. I would like to add something to
Of course.
earlier point about manifestos, and also being part of this PAFREL initiative to hold the manifestos more accountable, and there is a there is a planned process now to demand that, because to treat that as a social contract, and we are doing it quite seriously. And as Rohanta said, there is, I don't know, I'm not sure about the exact number, but there's a significant number of youth, the first time voters, and also the voters are undecided. He said 50%. I think I agree with that. So there is an opportunity to force the parties to really come up with their analysis of the current problem, so and their solutions. So for that, PAFREL has prepared a framework. That framework is quite, I think it was discussed quite extensively, and we are also demanding that even the manifesto formulation process be very democratic and participatory. So it's not just a group of intellectuals belonging to the party preparing that and putting forward. No, and also a time frame. I agree with you, Shamir. You said that these KPIs have been talked and all that, but before they get elected, I think that manifesto should not be just a piece of paper. So I think there's an opportunity to really create public awareness and also get the public to demand from each party. And then in last few weeks, this group has met all the party leaders. I also met as part of the citizens group, and they seem to be taking it seriously, because they are a little worried that now the citizens have a bit bigger voice, as demonstrated by what happened in 2022. Not that there will be that kind of scale of protests, but at least though they deny, they know that this accountability and a system change is demanded by the people. So I think there's an opportunity, and we should push for that, and the media and we all should support that kind of the pressure should be put on the parties to treat it as a social contract and deliver and be accountable for that. Now coming back to your question on this apology, I think it's a positive step, but that's not enough, because now I was the president of the Sri Lanka Medical Association on this issue. Sri Lanka Medical Association, being the lead professional medical association, made a bold statement saying that this is unscientific and burial should be allowed. And that was the standard around the world, I mean World Health Organization. But there were certain scientists from whatever backgrounds, they presented a different case. There has to be accountability, because this is based on science. So apology itself is not enough. I think the community, and also we should ask what the community feels. I don't belong to that community, so I can't make this thing. Certain things I think we have to look at reconciliation in that, in certain matters.
But do you think, Dr. Vinya, that the cabinet of ministers are oblivion to the emotions of the minority populace in the country?
I don't think so. I think it was probably just because it was expected from them, and they would see it very superficially. But I think that pain and the damage it caused, I think, has not been fully acknowledged. So I would say, I said that it's a good gesture. At least there is some form of recognition now that some mistake has been done.
Dr. Vinya, though, I mean that apology for the forced cremation coming on the same day as the anniversary of Black July, for which Mr. Wickramasinghe has not offered any apologies for the role that his party has played in it.
I agree. So I think it's probably it's not just Black July. I think there have been so many instances where there had been gross violations of rights of all communities in this country, not just. So I think that is where we have failed. We don't have a serious reconciliation.
But do you feel that when you look at, because it's just an apology, right? I mean, even with Black July and even now the forced cremations, I think it's wishful thinking to expect that there'll be any kind of accountability, real accountability, before things that people said, violations of basic academic discipline by certain individuals. I don't think we can expect accountability on that
Even
front.
if we don't expect nothing, I
but
think
that
we should.
gesture itself, do you feel that it's just because this is the most recent thing, politically there are individuals who are trying to cleanse themselves of that act which they may have enabled or supported, and but just before the election they want to get back in?
Nadeem, can I put your question in another way?
Sure, go ahead, Neresh.
Dr. Vinya, if there weren't an election coming, would we even see any kind of, I mean, would the politicians even dream of apologizing?
No, honestly, no.
So then it's not an
Right,
apology.
but still,
it is an apology of an
still,
apology.
Yeah, okay, but then our response itself
Yeah.
is that we say that it's not enough. So that itself, I think, gets recorded. It's also being debated. That discourse has to continue. Right?
Dr. Vinay, do you feel that the wrong person or persons is apologizing as well? Because the apology is not coming. I mean, sure, Mr. Wickramasinghe is continuing the tenure of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, but I don't see Gotabaya Rajapaksa apologizing for any of this.
No, I don't think I can answer that. I mean, whoever he's the incumbent, so there is a value and a strength in what that apology brings, no, so that you can't can't say that it's not significant. But what I'm saying is that that's not enough. There has to be, at least in the future, because this is not the first pandemic, though it's the first pandemic in our lives, this is not going to be the last pandemic. And we are doing so much work on pandemic preparedness now. Along with climate change, there will be a huge public
more
health
frequent.
Yeah, so how do we, and particularly the demographics are changing locally, what guarantee is there that it will not happen again? That science will be distorted again, what's the guarantee? So that's why that debate has to continue, so that even the young generation, and there are a lot of professionals who are now very much, they transcend these ethnic and religious divides, political divides. That's the opportunity for this country. I mean, today I participated in a certain new launch of a new program where you could see a future for this country, because the young people bring best of science and technology along with values, and also their commitment towards nature and all that. So that's the promise. So I think when we bring in governance and justice and human rights into that discourse, I think at least the next generation will put these things right.
Dr. Vinya, speaking of democracy, rights and governance, under the Sarvodaya umbrella, you also have the Deshodaya movement, and that's the arm that focuses specifically on these, encompassing number of, I think over 200, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes, that's right,
grassroots committees around the country. At the 2019 election, you all supported the candidacy of Mahesh.
That's not correct. I don't think the Deshodaya movement supported. There was a collective of civil society organizations,
of which you were also a part.
Yes.
Okay,
but
so not directly, but via the collective. Then coming to, when you look at the options that the public has at this upcoming election, do you have any idea regarding either through a collective or directly, will you be backing the candidacy of
No, I don't
candidate?
think. Even those organizations which formed that alliance did not. They wanted a different discourse, and beyond a certain point, it was made very clear that they will not support a candidate in the electoral process. But there were issues that, because none of those candidates took up certain
Is the
issues.
platform still alive?
No, that platform is not there, because that was at that time, it was a different time.
Yeah.
And particularly the young people, they wanted a different alternative to be discussed. So in that sense, it was that was the space in which this collective was working. But what's important, I think, is that a similar sort of pressure need to be put on all the parties to come up with solutions to the serious problems that this country is facing.
Yeah. Dirukshi, if I can ask you, from a perspective of a senior journalist, Sri Lanka this year dropped 15 spots in the World Press Freedom Index. Meanwhile, we've seen fairly draconic legislation like the Online Safety Act. There have been steps that are happening which, when you consider them as a collective? This new amendment that is being proposed, the repeated questioning regarding the term of the president and the parliament, when taken cumulatively, these seem to indicate that there is some skullduggery afoot as far as elections are concerned. One, do you believe that there is such skullduggery afoot? And do you see, when you look at the media landscape, do you think that we are well equipped enough to be the public's watchdog at this crucial time?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I think it's very easy to assume that there are motives behind some of the things that are being pushed. Legal amendments, dusting up old laws. Now, these are also very old tactics, right? Different governments have used it throughout Sri Lankan history. And there is nothing surprising about what happens in that sphere. So, we've been using, human rights instruments like the ICCPR Act and the PTA. Used and reused and abused. So the issue is, why do we have laws? We have laws to protect fundamental freedoms of the people and keep things in balance, right? So that my rights do not violate yours, simply for that purpose. But for politicians, and irrespective of whether these are the politicians who are right now in office or people come and gone, it is the same thing. So some of these are really, for me personally, I think they are instruments that are being used to stifle people's ideas, and particularly I think after 2022 they must be also a little bit scared, right? There could be public protest, there could be public opinion that really goes against. If you really recall how it was crushed, the way in which the laws and the multiple instruments that those in power used to quell those protests and to quell public voice. I think come close to an election, they would probably try to use some of these instruments, because this is history, this is what they do.
You fear that we may not have the environment for the conduct of a free and fair election?
Well, that's a difficult one. But at the same time, I would say from my my perspective, I think these instruments will be used. They will have to be used, because if we have actually notified politicians and political groups, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. I think there is a little bit of fear. Very recently, I saw the statement by the president, who says that there is misinformation around debt restructuring. So he is quite unhappy. This I know as a fact. He is quite unhappy about the way in which we discuss this particular issue. It's crucial, right, that we try and understand how debt restructuring is done. But if we don't understand, then whose fault is that? Somebody has to unpack it to in layman's terms. As Shamir said, do people understand these things? If there is a disconnect, that is also because you don't communicate. You don't believe that you have to communicate to the people, because we don't really count.
So, Rohantha, if you look at, you just mentioned before that you have 1 and 2 who are going to contest the presidential polls, but we don't know who the third, fourth, fifth is. And you may be aware by now, Rohantha, that Tamil parties in the north and east are trying to field a presidential candidate of their own. Is this a good option for the country?
See, Shamir, we're in a very challenging time, right? We had in 2010, we had almost like 72% of the population saying, I want to vote. And in 2015, we had 82% of the people saying, I want to vote. 2019, 84%. So the voice of people is strong. Now, yes, you have one brand that has come from the northern eastern province who is going to represent the cross-section of people. I mean, that's fine. The more brands that are in place, which is better, because the issues of the people are very clear. I mean, whether it be a manifesto that they put and the reams of paper that they put, doesn't matter. Because those days, that lady down the road who is selling mangoes, whatever that happens in the macro, the child goes to school. She doesn't feel it much. At home, whether it be borrowed money from different countries, the food is on the table. Today is different. They are having 2 meals a day. That lady finds it difficult to buy the uniform and the books to send the kid to school. So now they want from the politician, tell me, how do I reduce my price of electricity and how do I pay for it?
Ross, do you see any of the political parties really having any kind of serious policies drafted to address the cost of living crisis?
No, it is not coming through right now. I mean, when you have prices of food which was 100 rupees in 1980, today, 2018, today it's 240 rupees. The price index done by Pepper Cube says 100 rupees 2018, today is 240. And the cost of economic crisis done by Department of Census Statistics, it say prices have increased by 92%. Now that is government data. So even the one I talked about, the uniforms and stationery, was also census and statistics. So we have not yet got any solution. So which is why the public sector is on the road, because their salaries range from 40,000
and those
to
incomes
70,000.
have barely increased at all.
So this is absolutely logical. So my point, what I am saying is that the more brands that are there in the market, telling them that we are going to meet the people's needs, the better choice that people would have. So it doesn't matter whether it's a coalition group which is there. The fact of the matter is that within the next 3 months, all these brands will have to find creative ways to tell people, I'm the best candidate. And you know, Shamir, a lot of people say that Sri Lankan voter is dumb and they can be tricked, which is not true. 2015, a group of people appointed with 62% majority was kicked out at 2:30 in the morning in 2015. And that a new group of people that were appointed by a 62% mandate was thrown out in 2018 without one seat. And a person appointed in 2019, which was next to God, I would reckon, when you go on the road, was sent in a boat. So Sri Lankan consumer is not the Indian consumer who is vociferous like what we see. I mean, we have worked in India. They are very vociferous, very vocal.
You're saying political loyalties are very fickle.
Sri Lankan voter is very quiet. They would, your mom and dad, my mom and dad will go and just vote, and just because there are millions of affiliations, people think that these alliances and affiliations are going to get people to vote. No, this time consumer is going to be very clear who is going to reduce my electricity prices, who is going to reduce my
Right. So Rohanta, I recollect a few years ago when you were first featured on Face the Nation, when I posed a question about what action must you take to revive the state-owned enterprises in the country. You say we have to be profitable at the end of the day. Rohanta, 2 years after, you're on Face the Nation today and saying the Ceylon Electricity Board is making profits. You're saying the CPC is making profits. You're saying the Water Board is making profits. All well and good, isn't it? Don't you think that these state-owned enterprises have to be run at a profit?
Yes, Shamir, but the question is that they are meant to cover the cost, and you need a more macroeconomic policy that says, if I reduce my price of electricity just to cover my cost, then my apparel cost will be competitive. My tea prices will be competitive. Right now, if you look at the burning issues of a corporate, the first thing they say is electricity prices. The second they say is increasing raw materials. Third, they talk about diesel. So, if you look at JAF says it's much more profitable to manufacture things from Vietnam and the Bangladesh of the world than a global company operating from Sri Lanka. The other day, I don't want to mention a name of a brand, a confectionery brand. There are two confectionery brands, two big brands in Sri Lanka. One of them said that the pricing of a biscuit is going to be cheaper by manufacturing in India.
So, one of the questions that are posed by one of our viewers. Now, we spoke about manifestos and all that and more. Now, once elected, the elected people cannot be removed. So, keeping on exploiting the country and the people, how do we remove them and suspend them?
Shamir, the game has changed. I mean, he is a person who got a 70% mandate. Understood. He was removed in 2 years. So, Sri Lanka has changed in the last 5 years. Nowadays, when a president is appointed, within 2 years, if you don't deliver, the housewife is on the road. I mean, you see housewives from upper middle income in Kohuvala Junction protesting, which you will never see 3-4 years back. So, the game has changed, and I think the
Rohantha, right.
Sorry.
But having said that, I agree you're referring to the Aragalaya and what the Aragalaya did and all that. But let's take a look at the last 2 years. Just take a look at the last 2 years. Everything has been growing. You know, the cost of, you said about electricity, you said about diesel, vegetable prices at one point, carrots were going at 3,000 rupees a kilo. Let's not forget that. That was in December last year. And vegetable prices are on the rise. People are not being able to eat all 3 meals a day. You just mentioned here itself that they only have 2 meals a day. You spoke about the lady selling mangoes, which is very emotional. All that is well and good. But why don't we see them on the streets anymore?
See who? The public?
Yes.
They are. See, Shamir.
We are not seeing them anymore.
Well,
Is it that they are waiting for the election? Is
No.
there a sense of,
See-
there's a patience, knowing that an election is coming, so that they will get their, the power to vote the government out of office or choose whichever candidate they want?
Niresh, the share of voice was on the road in 2022. But right now, the share of voice is on media. If you look at our social media, if you analyze it, now people are not scared to put what they want to put on social media. So people have become intelligent. The share of voice has moved from the street into social media. People are not scared to voice their view even on traditional media. I mean, on MTV. I mean, people are very clear on their
Rohan,
choice.
do you also feel that in 2022, with the queues, with the gas, the electricity being unavailable, that there was definitely a higher income segment that was potentially participating in protests for the first time, and that was also funding protest movements because there were donations coming in, kitchen in terms of food, water, medical aid, etc. And that when that higher income segment stopped protesting, when their power and electricity, when their electricity and gas supplies were rectified, that the lower income segment no longer had an ability to express their voice without fear of being repressed.
So, sorry, what's your question?
The question being that the absence of the high income group is why the people that Shamir was talking about not being on the streets anymore is they are unable to protest anymore because they don't have that support, that financial backing, that etc. to keep those protest movements going.
See, I mean, maybe you're right, but the question is that if you look at the last 2 weeks, there was protest from the public sector. Now, they don't need funding from the A and B SSC group. See, a time has come now that consumers are vociferous, and believe me, 2024 elections, you would see the voice of people. Consumers are.
Let me ask Danusha.
Go ahead.
Now, when our own businessmen and entrepreneurs are going and investing in other countries and openly saying that it's better to invest in other countries due to the cost, then the net result is that the job creation in this country is much, much less. And we need about 300,000 new jobs every year because we have that number of people who come out of school. So what needs to be done to get our businessmen to stay here?
Yeah, I think Niresh,
we spoke about the cost of electricity. I mean, clearly that's one.
yeah.
But shouldn't the parties who are running for election now actually be focusing very much on that as well?
Yeah, I think Niresh, we also need to look into the quality of investments and where exactly the investments are going into, because now I highlight that point. Now Bangladesh was like the darling of the apologists of the market model, like now what is now right now going, and nobody is highlighting the comparing these two ideas, or what the Bangladesh was highlighted as the fact that look, a marvel of the market model. Look, they are growing at like breakneck speeds and their incomes are rising. And right now, even without this whole, all the upper middle class support, people are on the streets, and obviously we are seeing them being killed by the administration. So they also have a very similar pattern of, despite the fact that there is a difference in the rates of growth and expansion, the type of growth and the type of investments that have sort of expanded in Bangladesh are quite so much similar to that of Sri Lanka, what we call in general very labor intensive. Your perception, your imaginative power is not really needed to make the production process moving. So we need investments of that particular quality to transform an economy where there is the stock, the quality of the capital stock, so to speak. Now, if we look at what's going on with our production structure, it has remained mostly the same in terms of the exports or the nature of technology that has been going into it. So because that has a greater impact on what we call the labor productivity, which also relates to wages, because even in neoclassical economics they say your wages is equal to your marginal productivity. So marginal productivity will not move even according to those standards. That will not move if there is the quality of the capital stock remains the same. So let's say, for instance, in our case, we have garments, and then there is very labor intensive assembly type of work in the free trade zone, and on top of that we have tea and then some other plantation exports. If you look at tea, they've been plucking tea for the last 200 years with their two fingers. But you have tea industry in Japan also. What has happened to that? How does a worker that is working in the Japanese plantations going about with his life? He's coming to the plantations in some posh car, and he gets fed up with that.
Can I just add to that? Like,
not that I'm promoting consumerism.
Do you feel that Sri Lankan society, the voters, the intelligentsia, the academics, etc., do you feel that when it comes to politics and governance, that we've gotten priorities kind of wonky? Because I was just looking, and I wanted to actually bring this to you. Singapore recently had a transition in leadership with Lee Hsien Loong leaving after 20 years and Lawrence Wong coming in. And I was looking at the media coverage surrounding the end of this period and how they scored his performance. Domestic media in Singapore, right? The Straits Times, Channel News Asia, etc. And it's all based on indicators. So they rank his performance based on these very specific indicators across economy, infrastructure, housing, social, healthcare and environment, which are things that we would expect advanced society to be looking at rather than the more sort of political things. So number of free trade agreements, median income in that time has almost tripled. Median, not average. The inequality has actually gone down at a time where in the rest of the world inequality is increasing.
Yeah.
When you look at because we keep talking about, there have been many who, even politicians who have said, oh, we're going to make this like Singapore. But you see, it seems that the way we're going about it, the entire approach is very wonky.
Yes, I think now, I guess we can look at it in this way, that now there's always, in the developed part of the world, there's always a very sharp contradiction between the general public and the ruling elite. There's always this dialogue, and that has moved them forward right throughout since, I guess, the time of the Industrial Revolution, when the conflict began. Like not that at that point.
So
but
this is what I wanted. This is what I want to focus on, right? Because I feel that when it comes to Singapore's approach to governance and policy making in general seems to be very utilitarian.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel that a lot of the intelligentsia in Sri Lanka tend to get bogged down in ideologies. Because there they're not talking about whether your ideology is capitalist or socialist, or whether it's neoliberal or neoclassical. There they want to know what is the impact your policy will have on the country's Gini coefficient. What is the impact your policy will have in terms of public transport, the network expansion and cost. So they're looking at very real markers of performance. Do you feel that in Sri Lanka's context, our pundits have gotten bogged down in political rhetoric and ideology, that they're missing the forest for the trees?
Just to clarify your question, who exactly do you mean by they? These so-called criteria?
Our society in general, right? Even like not just your like average voters, but think tanks, academics at university level, at even in the way issues are covered in the media, right? Do you feel that the conversation itself has gotten so bogged down in rhetoric and ideology that you're not focusing on outcomes?
Yes, so that's what I was trying to get at, because I mean, even if you take, let's say, a European, more advanced democracy, you see much more engagement even within the constituency itself. The quality of engagement from the general public is much more greater. I think that's what you're also highlighting through these examples which you see in Singapore. So now that has been part of right throughout their history, at least their modern history, that there was a marked conflict which actually erupted the people's imagination and people's involvement in the political process. As we know, all these political theories are rising from these regions, so that they're not just limited to texts, but they are also part of the society itself. Even this form of scientific thinking, I mean we see it in the popular culture. So you see sci-fi movies bringing, it's part of their general way of life, so to speak. Not to say that they don't have these consumerist, or let's say very.
Do you feel that political parties in Sri Lanka, whether it's let's say going by opinion polls, at least the two front runners right now are the NPP and the SJB, followed by let's just say, if you look at the major political parties, SJB, NPP, UNP, SLPP, etc. Do you feel they have the capacity to develop draft manifestos which lay down not only their policies, but also the expected impact of those policies, right? Okay, I'm going to start giving out this much in terms of salary increments to public officials, and this is the impact that it will have. We're going to, this is going to be agricultural policy, and this is the impact it will have on these economic indicators. Do you think we just don't have that capacity, or the capacity exists just not within the political system?
I think there are two things with respect to that. One is obviously the capacity issue. Then, of course, the issue with regard to interests they serve, and the interests are, of course, being limited, or let's say ring-fenced by the particular their class alliances, basically, which are represented by these various let's say the mainstream parties. So those class alliances tend to limit their scope of interest, and which itself also would impact their capacity, so to speak. But
what are the class alliances?
Let's say the example you just took about the bloated public sector, which has been sort of hackneyed in mainstream media, and that everybody puts this point forward that look, our public sector is bloated, this is eating into public resources. Well, let's say yes, now there we have about 1.4 million people. Let's say we have 50% in excess. Now right now our wage bill is about, wage and salaries is about 1 trillion. That is the bill, total bill. So if we let's say let go of half of the excess staff, it will come down by roughly 500 billion. Now look into the tax holidays given by the government. Now under the duress of the IMF, now this was also highlighted through the protest movement that look, the massive tax fraud, tax evasion is going on with the big fish, and that the public were demanding that these things should be immediately done away with, and also with respect to corruption, swindling public money and so on. So somehow these things made up into even the IMF set of demands, but they are not legally binding. That is the trick here, right? So just to save face, you can put anything on paper, no? So what matters is whether they are legally binding, whether the contract or the agreement
my specific question, Dhanush, was regarding, because you mentioned class alliance.
Yeah, that's right. So that is what I'm getting
class alliances of the political
So
party?
now look at the tax concessions itself amounts to 978 billion for 12 months, March 31st, 2022, April 1st, 2023.
These are tax concessions given under the current administration.
Under the administration, the government's administration, which
the current, like which party? Because we are talking about the class alliances of the individual parties. So which? Party
so that's what I said. Initially, the ruling elite divides itself into 2 blocks, and then just so that you get the fake.
They're all the same. Basically.
Exactly. So you get the fake impression that you have a choice. But end of the day, it's the same.
So when you say class alliances, what you mean is that the political establishment
exactly
is allied with the
corporates, yes.
With the corporates.
So, yes.
So Dr. Vinay, I just want to pick your brain on this. Now, the US presidential race, now we saw the manner in which on the 27th of June, how Joe Biden performed at the first presidential debate that was organized by CNN. So there was supposed to be 2 presidential debates, one on the 27th of June, the latter to be on the 10th of September. Right after his abysmal performance in the first debate, 24 days later, Democratic presidential nominee for the US presidency, Joe Biden, pulled out of the race. The people realized, the Democrats realized that he was not fit to rule the country. How important is it for Sri Lanka to have such a debate between the presidential candidates? So we too can decide then as to who is fit to rule us in the future.
Yeah, fully agree. I think we should have public debate on key issues that affect the people.
But why is it that even the 2 front runners right now, like the SJB and the NPP, when they were told to have a presidential debate, both of them, not just one political party alone, both of them were blaming it on each other and were not coming to the forefront to face the public. One was saying there should be an economic council debate. The other was saying no economic council debate. We have to have a debate between the front runners. What is this?
Is it that they are?
I think once the election is announced, I think for sure they'll have to come out and debate those issues, right?
But are they unsure about their own policies?
I
because
don't know.
if they have,
I really don't know.
Because
I don't represent any of them. So
if you recollect, Dr. Vinaya, in 2019 when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was asked to come for a presidential debate, it was a fireside chat, and when he was asked a question, the way he reacted and the way he responded, he said most of the time, please ask my brother, right? So when you had someone in that caliber answering questions, people still went ahead and voted him in. Don't you think
But
the
I
people
think
also
it's
are
not just the
responsible?
debate. I think there were many other factors which you all know. No, so I think if we look at the future, I think once the candidate once the election is announced and the candidates are finalized, I am sure that is the role of also the civil society and the media to demand for that kind of debate.
Right,
For
very
sure.
good. Dr. Vinay, if that is the case, hypothetically, let's say there are three candidates. Anukumar Disanayaka, Sajith Premadasa, Ranil Wickramasinghe at the presidential debate. And you have a lot of experience in this political culture in the country, Dr. Ariratna. Tell me, who would fare better at a presidential debate?
No idea, because I really don't know how they are going to, what issues that they are going to address and in what way. So I will be another citizen in that situation, and I'll decide, because like Rohantha said, I don't think any one of us have decided, probably, unless
If there was a debate, what should be the key issues that need to be highlighted at this debating question, and what should be the questions that are posed
at
to the
least
presidency?
three. It's on the economy, not about the macroeconomic stability and whatever the rhetoric that they are talking about, but how it affects the ordinary person, how it affects the household, and the social protection, because it's right now there is no proper social protection. I mean, we are only talking about Asma Suma and the cash transfers, but social protection is not just about that kind of dole out. It's something much more comprehensive in this modern world. Now we still have an archaic system. So now there had been changes to beneficiary selection and all that, but I think we need to have a much better social protection system in Sri Lanka, where these vulnerable groups and vulnerable individuals throughout the life cycle, that they are cared for, right? That's number one. So economic stability, but also about the social protection system. Secondly, when it comes to the social sectors like health and education, it's not just about free health, but how do you really make the health sector and those other sectors which are directly affecting the daily lives of the public, it may be transport, how you make them more efficient, how you eliminate corruption, right? So I think there are definite measures that has to be put to the public. Then also I would say that we need to really look at the reconciliation and ethnic harmony and things like that. What is their
evolution of power?
That all comes under governance, right? So, but we have had a very bitter war, and there has been a huge cost that we paid as a nation. So, but still sometimes we are not sure whether the root causes are addressed and justice is delivered. So I think reconciliation is important, and then it's connected to the larger issues of governance. So
but Dr. Vinay, the real question is about having a good team behind you to support that candidate. It's just not the CEO of a company who runs the company. It's like the management that runs the company as well. So in your opinion, who has the best team?
No idea, because we haven't seen the team still. Because there has to be the candidate announced, and then their team has to be, we see people who are party stalwarts coming, but I would like to see as a citizen the real individuals who are.
So in the Sri Lankan election system, Dr. Vinya, if you look at it, when there is a presidential election, you clearly see who the main candidates are. We at least know by now as to who would be contesting at least in the next election. However, we don't talk about a running mate.
Agree.
The Prime Minister of the country, because right after the presidential election, there is going to be a general election. How important is this?
Absolutely important. So that's why I think you yourself said at the start that Friday the election commission has to announce. So once that is announced, I think these are the things that we as citizens, as professionals, should demand from the political leaders.
Dr. Vinya, are you anxious as me about the candidates who would be contesting the upcoming elections?
yes and no, because what choice we have? We can't, import from any other country or from the moon. So we know the possible candidates, and sometimes some of the there are aspirants, who really want to be candidates, who have enough resources to also be candidates. But we know that they can't run a country. So I think we'll have to wait and see when the elections are announced and the potential candidates come forward. Then we'll have to demand from them their team, and
when they don't perform, as Rohanta says, chase them away after 2 years.
Let me ask Dilrukshi. We've spoken about some terrifying statistics. Really, a number of people who can't find 3 meals a day, and Dr. Vinya referred to malnutrition and so on. So we, around this table, we understand what all that means. The 7 of us certainly do. But Dilrukshi, do you feel that the politicians of the political leaders of the major parties, do they actually understand? Do they put the human face to these statistics?
I think not. And I just want to quote from a very simple exercise, the one that I referred to earlier. What do people really want? A reduction in cost of living and health. Fertilizer. I've been talking to fisher folk, farmers, school teachers in villages, just so that we may find actual answers to some of the questions that you're asking, whether we feel the same way as they do. Their issues seem to be pretty different, but then of course taxation, I'm just reading out from some of the stuff that they shared with me. Economic support for the vulnerable groups. And if you talk to people in the northeast where there was conflict and there are residual issues, they not only want justice, they also want guarantees of non-recurrence. We don't seem to be talking about any of these issues. I mean, it's done and dusted, right? We lived through those years and we no longer refer to any of those issues. And we don't really, when you think about governance and when you think about manifestos, you don't actually put ideas across that are linked to real people. So I think, Niresh, it's not really there and they don't make the real connection. So that's why people's aspirations are so far away from the politicians, agenda setting. And this is also why there's so much angst and why we experience what we experienced 2 years ago. And I just want to add something to what Rohanta did answer earlier. And that is because you cannot continue a protest movement for 2 years plus. I mean, tell me the global examples where this is possible, where you have the resources and the stamina of the people to go through that. But they have put forward some issues that are really relevant. I think the public conscience has been pricked. And that's really important, so that we will remember that some of those issues are still very relevant. And we don't have the technocratic leaders, what Nadeem was talking about. So we don't have the technocratic leaders. We look to Singapore and say, oh, this is what we would like to be and we would like to have this kind of leaders. You just don't hope for them and they just appear in this country. You have to create them. Political parties also have an onus of grooming their next generation. If you recall, each of these parties, why do you have splinter groups? That's also because you do not address your internal democracy issues. This has been so consistent. If you see, all these breakaway groups have come connected to internal governance. There is no governance of the country. There is no internal governance. So how do you put a people's agenda? We actually look...
In a nutshell, how can you expect democratic governance from inherently undemocratic parties?
I do agree. And I think we have to, as people, now the civil society, each of these people are sitting around this table, you actually represent those public aspirations. So it is also up to us to demand the kind of political culture, compliance from the political parties. Simple example, you have a quota system in the local authorities for women, right? And you're supposed to be having a quota. But eventually you don't actually invest in the women candidates. So that is an internal democracy issue that you don't actually look at. 51+% of the population in this country, we don't want to address those. So they really do not know what these women want. a woman from the north and east would want very different things from a woman in
No, but even you speak about the quota system of the leadership for local government bodies. We saw how it was flawed. I will tell you a classic example. A woman who may have lost her seat in that particular ward in question invariably gets into the list because of the quota system, and she has been rejected by the people of her ward. So that system was flawed.
Okay, there are many flaws in that system as well as the overall system, right? So you also don't have a youth quota. I mean, we have all these declarations, we will give representation to women. Do we actually count people living with disability? Can someone with disability be the president of Sri Lanka? Can a person from the minority communities become the president or the prime minister? That would be the day that I would want to be very proud Sri Lankan, to be able to see that, you know, your ethnicity and religion will not be an indicator, but what you actually have to offer this country in terms of solutions. That is what really should matter. So in that sense, I look forward to different candidates from different groups, different ethnic groups, different regions, because that would at least give us that flavor of diversity that this country really deserves.
So a variety of choice.
At least.
So Rohan, if we look at how politicians have been performing,
Non-performing.
politicians have been performing very abysmally, I would say, Niresh.
Well, if this were a
country.
three-ring circus, they'd be performing very well.
So, getting back to the real issue that we have right now is the fact the pack is shuffled, but the jokers remain. Is it going to be the case this time around at a presidential or a general election?
See, Shamir, I'm positive. I'm positive for two reasons. Number one is that the people are very vocal, and they are not scared now to talk or to come on the streets. Number two is that yes, the macro structure is right, but the question is it has not trickled down to the people. So now, irrespective of who these people whom we are going to get at the presidential election and the general election, they know that they have to reduce the cost of living. They have to make sure that they get the economy ticking. Now, for that we need two things. Number one, we have to drive exports. Now, there are free trade agreements signed with Thailand. Thailand is a 432 billion economy. We are like a 74 billion economy, but yet if you look at the product baskets that we have, it is not catered to the needs of the people of Thailand. So you will find that it's not going to make a major impact on our exports. Now, if you take the free trading agreement with India, I mean, when I was chairman of exports in 2004-05, we were at like $500 million to India. Today, in 2024, we are at 1.3 billion, and all the products that are marketed happens to be just basic products, not value added, no branded. Now the question is, we owe 5 billion to India, and we have to pay that back. So now whoever who comes in 2025-24, they will have to see how do you sit with India, come out with a great economic partnership. How do we get our tea brands in there? How do we make sure apparel brands are in there? And they will have to give that kind of leadership. And Shamir, we know that in our own companies, you know, when you have top leaders who leave the company and you give it to a second liner to take over, they do a better job than the leaders.
No, but if you look at it, Rohan, certain companies in Sri Lanka has really used this FTA in question. I can name a few companies for the benefit of our viewers. Let's take a look at Damru for an example.
Yeah.
Very prominently based in South India and doing extremely well, using the leverage through the FTA that was signed with India. Let's take a look at Elephant House for an example, how they entered the beverage industry in India. Let's take a look at the canning business, which is headed by the Muralidharan family,
Yeah.
partnering with the Tatas in terms of establishing a canning facility in India through the FTA. So you have had good companies
Absolutely.
who have really leveraged that opportunity, and they would be bringing back, hopefully, the money to the country as well. So you have a few good examples, don't we?
Yeah, we do, Shamir. But if you look at our mainline business, apparel, rubber, and the tea business, those are the top 3 run brands that gives us 5, 6.5 plus 3, almost 9 billion of our total exports. Total exports are 12 billion. Now, these top three brands are not, that categories are not in India. Now, we have something like 7 million pieces of apparel in the free trade agreement. We have about 15,000 kilograms of tea. Utilization is 2.5 to 3%. So,
but tea, Rohantha, the situation is really different, right? That's simply because the Indian tea industry is very dominant, and if you look at markets like Iraq, for an example, Indian tea was not in that space before, but today India is exporting very heavily to Iraq. Sri Lanka lost the markets, particularly in countries like Egypt, for Kenyan teas. So the situation with regard to tea industry in Sri Lanka is very, very poor. That is completely on the tea industry and the stakeholders in question who are not pushing for the liberalization of the tea industry in the country. As a result of that, all these problems have happened. Because you know, Rohantha, the tea industry in Sri Lanka could be grown to a $4 billion, $5 billion industry, but we're stuck at 1.5 billion and 2 billion just because we are not exporting or liberalizing the tea industry in the country.
With you. So, Shamir, spot on, Shamir. My question is that we've been looking at this whole thing of a tea hub, where you allow this area of tea to be brought in and then you have the mixing that happens, and end of the day consumer wants a beverage. They're not saying I want Ceylon tea. That era is gone. Now these kinds of serious decisions will have to be made by this incumbent group of people who come. Number two, if you look at tourism, Shamir, I mean, end of the day, what have we come to now? We are paying almost $25, 18.25 plus $7, when it was $1 at one time. And 20% of our business has crashed when almost the top competitor destinations are giving free arrival on visa. Now, at this moment of time, we know that the golden egg happens to be tourism, and that one, we have stifled it, and the whole industry is up in arms. We all know about it, right? It's like an elephant in the room, and nobody's talking about it. Now, the tea industry on the 1,700 rupees per kilogram went to court. Supreme Court gave an order and said it's not going to be increased to the RPCs. Now you'll see the travel industry, tourism industry again going to Supreme Court on this visa issue, because you know the report that has been presented shows that it doesn't, the proper tender process has not been followed. So my point is that this new group of people who are coming will not be able to have just only share of voice of what they say. They will have to start implementing the question that Nadeem asked on the private sector and employment and productivity. These guys will have to now start driving GDP growth. And if you don't drive economic growth, all these policy recommendations that has been done, 73% IMF stipulations, you know, you have 80 laws have been inducted in the last 2 years. Who cares?
No, but Rohantha, now the real problem is, you spoke about creating an export-driven economy in the country, but look at the export sector right now in the country. The export sector is bleeding. Why? Because inconsistent policy when it comes to the US dollar, inconsistent policy that has been prevalent with regard to government action. You spoke about electricity, diesel, and so on and so forth as well before. A 30% tax on export-driven companies. All this is really putting a strain. And if you look at it, many tea companies, as you mentioned before, have closed down because they can't afford to be in business when they are crumbling into pieces in front of your own eyes.
Sure. So, Shamir, the question is that everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. There's been some degree of strengths that fitted into our economic landscape in the last 2 years, and we see the policy stabilization that's happening. So maybe in 2015 you need a new type of leadership that is totally going to be private sector savvy in terms of driving the policy reforms you mentioned, that's going to hit the market, because unless we do that, we cannot make these people who are 91% spending more than the expenditure and the income, and if you just go to every town, you'll see the pawning booths opening up. And now central bank has put a rule saying that any leasing company can only have 30% exposure to gold. So, there are strategic issues that the new government in place will have to take, and Shamir, this new government that comes in will have to be knowledge driven. If you are not going to be knowledge driven and you do this rhetoric like saying, I'm going to run this country, it's not going to work. And especially if you look at the university system, we have what? From 44,000 students, 14,000 students who get into the arts faculty. 80% of them are not employed, which means that there should be radical change even at the university end if you want that knowledge economy coming in that can drive our exports to be competitive. There's no point in us saying that we want our exports to be competitive because the competition comes from the R&D done by universities.
Right. So Dhanush, very quickly, tell us, I just want to pit you against Rohantha for a second here. Rohantha spoke about state-owned enterprises making a profit.
Sorry, couldn't follow.
Rohantha mentioned that state-owned enterprises making a profit, and he namely said the CPC, CEB, and the Water Board, that they made money in billions. What is your opinion about this? Do you think state-owned enterprises have to make money?
I think, there can be few perspectives regarding this issue. It depends on which SOE we are actually speaking about. Now, let's take electricity as an example. Now, electricity becomes an input for many other industries, and it especially becomes a key component of private sector production costs. And
it's also an essential service.
Absolutely.
Where the population is
concerned, the quality of life is concerned. So it not just, so we can't be just focused on the exact balance sheet, what is happening in the balance sheet of that particular firm. We should also we call it externalities in economics, that there can be positive externalities which are not represented within the balance sheet, positive or negative, which are much greater of value. So that is why what Dr. Rohantha came in, where it becomes really important, because if you are making profits there, you are making 1,000 times losses elsewhere in the economy. See, now if you bring down that loss or the profit, let's say now it was say 100 billion, you bring it down to something like 5 billion or something manageable. It can create multiplier effects in the economy where it can, attract, so to speak, investment. Let's not go into the quality of that, at least at that quantitative level. You can attract those type of investments, the quality of life improves, quality of education will improve. So the gains will be 1,000 times more than the loss of 95 billion. So it can also improve the tax revenue.
So very quickly, Dhanush, we need to wrap up as well. I just want to ask you, we are talking about so much of uncertainty. Rohantha said that he's optimistic but very positive about the future as well. However, if you look at the Colombo Stock Exchange, the market movements is just simply amazing. The money that is coming in from countries like India right now is very significant. The Colombo stock market is really showing some growth over the last few years and last few months. And if you look at the last few days alone, you see a lot of exchanges being happening with some big movers in the Colombo stock market as well. So is there a reflection of this at of the presidential election? Is that why we are seeing this movement, or someone is betting against big companies?
I'm not sure about the numbers because I also in general take a look what happens in the market, at least on the surface level. What I saw was the market activity was a bit something like subdued. It was going down in the few days.
The last 2.5 weeks it has been.
You mean the turnover levels have shot up? probably with the announcement of because it works with expectations, so that the uncertainty was sort of, let's say, it was removed with the debt restructuring numbers coming out. So despite the fact that that itself is a disaster, in my opinion, what we have done with the debt restructure, at least that unexpectedness or
so let me make it very easy for you, Dhanush. Just for those who are saying that President Ranil Wickremesinghe has done a good job thus far, and he should lead the country at the next election, what are your thoughts on that?
I think they should seriously think again, because right now, as you know, what we have been talking right now, the price levels have continued to move up. Now, if I just quote the central bank figures just came out, the price of rice has shot up 40% compared to last year, right? So then now they're talking about bringing down inflation, but it's the key commodities that enter into people's consumption basket that matter the most. And price of dal has also increased by, say, about 10%. But so, and as we were also discussing, the disconnections have increased. So malnourishment has shot up, as now we were saying. Now most of the people are living on just 2 meals a day. So we have to see who has consolidated in this span of, let's say, 1.5 years. And what is going on, what will happen in the future with the contracts now, all the restructuring agreements that this government has entered into. Pretty sure that in 2028 we are heading for another crash, another significant default, which is much more far worse than what we saw in 2022. Especially what we call the weighted average interest rate rising up to 8.2% after 2028, and the total stock of debt, the cost of debt rising up to close to 20 billion from something like 17 billion.
So Dhanush, you say Ranil Wickremesinghe is not the option.
Clearly not. And
who is the
matter of democracy,
who is the option? Who is the option?
I think people should create the option right now, because at this point of indecisiveness is, I think, really crucial, and it's quite positive, because
must we test a party that has not governed the country before?
I clearly think so. At the same time, that is not enough at all, because we see the mainstream parties that are most likely to get into power do not have, as you said very clearly, the capacity and also the right policies which can steer the ship in the right direction. But what we see is like what we call like an empty signifier. This can be moved anywhere if the public is conscious. I think the role of the media becomes crucial right now, because these unexplored issues that are grave in nature must be pushed through, so that public become more conscious, and that consciousness is reflected in the parties' proposals and their policies.
Right. So Dhanush's final thoughts is, you just heard Rohantha, that we have to have a reflection of party policies reflected upon as far as the elections are concerned. What is your key takeaways when we speak about the real issues of the public, Rohantha, in terms of an upcoming election?
Shamir, I just want to take a shot at the point that you mentioned before on the stock market, boom. See, stock market capitalization is only 20% of Sri Lanka. So stock market is not a reflection of 80% of the economy, which is totally driven by SME and micro SMEs. So that's point one. Point two is, it's like going to Colombo and looking at the restaurants, and you see all the restaurants are full. You can't get in some 5-star hotels that have just launched themselves, we can't even get a seating capacity. But how is that? How does that make sense? Because 9% of people are not impacted, and is that 9%, or let's say 10%, which is almost 2 million people, is what's circling around all the 5-star hotels and the resorts around Sri Lanka. So it's not a reflection. So the answer to your question on what are the burning issues, number one is that I would want to see some very concrete proposals in terms of driving exports and driving tourism, the low-hanging fruit. And right now, there is nothing being done on those two fronts, to be very honest, with a lot of responsibility that I say from policy perspective and in terms of a private-public partnership. We don't see it, and that's what the industry is saying. You read the media, it's what the media resonates. So whoever who is going to come on to play has to give us very good strategies there, because that's what's going to turn the income levels and the disposable income down the road, Shamit. So that would be very single-mindedly what I would say.
Thank you very much, Rohanta. I now move my attention towards Dilrukshi. What are your final thoughts, Dilrukshi? What are the key takeaways, and what's the way forward for Sri Lanka?
I think there should be a people's agenda. I know it's easier said than done, but for the past 2 years, people have been speaking up. And we should create the demand to ensure that we actually get what we are looking for, at least somewhere close to that. So when a new crop of leaders, perhaps, we should vote new people into office during a general election. We should also demand political parties should really have a rethink. They have to review their, the systems within before they offer anything to the public. And the KPIs that Nadeem was talking about, I think, it cannot be divorced anymore. So how do we bring in KPIs? We have to drive that people's agenda and non-recurrence of some of those issues that we have been discussing. Can they give us a guarantee that we wouldn't see what we saw, the failure of our own democracy, of our systemic issues, and the kind of predictions from economists that we will go through a far worse scenario in the coming years. So how do you actually connect it to a policy process where you can actually see non-recurrence of the old issues, but the opportunity to grow as a country, where young people and people who usually do not have voices out there, the marginalized, have a stake, have a voice.
Thank you very much. Dr. Vinya.
Yeah, Shamir, I think I have very little to add. I think democracy and safeguarding democracy is primary, and how each parties commit to that, because we see undermining of even the judiciary now, which is a very alarming trend which has not happened before. It's being said openly. And also in terms of the economy, in addition to what Rohanta and Dhanusha also proposed, I think creating opportunities for young people, I think that's crucial. We have 23% of our population young people, and we see the unemployment rate, which is at a very high level, I think more than 22%. So how do you create opportunities? So the party should really come up with proposals, because we have seen startups by young people and so many initiatives. They want to be a part of the solution. They are the ones who are now going to be leading the votes in the next election. So what do they commit to them? What is their social contract with the young people? And finally, I think the reconciliation, ethnic harmony, and how we move together as a nation in this diversity, I think that's very important. They have to come up with how do we deal with the past, because we have not dealt with the past. What is the accountability mechanism? Are there creative ways of addressing these issues? It's not always about justice and accountability alone, but then how we get people to unite. I think those are key issues that the candidates and the parties should put before the public, and the public has an opportunity, as Dhanushi said. I think this uncertainty is a golden opportunity to define the direction of this country the way we want as citizens. I think we should seize that opportunity and put the maximum pressure and come up with innovative solutions which can also be taken up by the political parties.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vinya Ratna, President of the Sarvodaya Movement, Attorney at Law Dilrukshi Handunetti, Co-founder, Director, Center for Investigative Reporting. Thank you very much, Dr. Rohanta Koral, former Chairman, Export Development Board and Sri Lanka Tourism. Thank you very much, Dhanusha Gihan Patrana, economist, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Thank you very much, Niresh Eliathambi, Consultant Director, Newsfirst. Thank you very much, Nadeem, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Let's fervently hope and pray next week when we meet at Face the Nation, we have a date for the presidential election of this country. 63 countries will be going for elections this year. Will Sri Lanka be the 64th? I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. Leadership is not about the next election, it's about the next generation. Take care and good night.